The printout showed exactly what it would cost. Todd Bergquist had run the numbers 3 times, checked them with the AG lender, even had the dealer work up a finance package. $147,000. That's what it would take to bring the farm into the precision agriculture era. A new John Deere 8300 with GPS guidance, a 9600 combine with yield monitoring, and a variable rate fertilizer spreader. The equipment could be financed over 7 years at 8.2%. Monthly payments would be $2,100. They'd need to mortgage for 100 acres of paid-off ground to make it work. His father looked at the printout for maybe 10 seconds. No, just that. No explanation, no discussion, no consideration of the technology advantages Todd had spent 6 weeks documenting. Leonard Bergquist was 68 years old in the spring of 1997. He'd farmed the same 1,600 acres in Brookings County, South Dakota, since taking over from his father in 1954. He'd survived droughts, floods, a grain embargo, the farm crisis of the 80s, and his wife's death in 1992. He'd paid off every acre he owned, and now his son wanted him to put 400 of those acres back in debt. Dad, you didn't even look at the analysis. I looked. The yield monitor data shows we're leaving money in the field. The GPS would let us. I know what it would let us do. Leonard folded the printout once, then again, making it small enough to fit in his shirt pocket. Saturday morning, 6 o'clock. You and me are taking a drive. Where? Mitchell. There's a farm auction. Todd knew better than to argue when his father used that tone. He also knew there were farm auctions every weekend in South Dakota. Most were retirement sales or estate dispersals. Standard transitions. Nothing that would change his mind about precision agriculture being the future of farming. He didn't know that his father had spent the previous evening on the phone with Ed Kruger at the First National Bank, asking specific questions about a specific auction. And he didn't know that what he was going to see on Saturday would alter his understanding of what it meant to put land at risk. Let me pause here to tell you what's coming. What I'm about to share is based on documented farm foreclosures that happened across the upper Midwest during the 1990s. While I've combined details from multiple real cases and added narrative elements for continuity, every economic trend, every piece of equipment mentioned, and every financial reality you'll hear about is pulled from Federal Reserve agricultural lending reports, USDA farm finance data, and documented auction records from this period. The numbers are real. The risks were real. And for farmers who lived through both the 80s crisis and the 90s recovery, the lessons were written in their neighbors' losses. Now, before we go further, you need to understand the context of 1997. This wasn't 1985. The farm crisis was over. Land values had recovered from their catastrophic lows. In South Dakota, farmland that sold for $320 per acre in 1987 was back up to $580 per acre by 1997. Commodity prices were stable. The Freedom to Farm Act of 1996 had ended the old target price system and promised farmers a new era of market-driven agriculture. Banks were lending again. Equipment dealers were busy. Young farmers like Todd looked at the technology revolution happening in agriculture and saw opportunity. Precision AG wasn't science fiction anymore. It was proven. Iowa State University's precision agriculture research showed yield increases of 8 to 15 bushels per acre when farmers used variable rate fertilizer application based on grid soil sampling. Purdue's farm management studies demonstrated that GPS guidance reduced overlap and input waste by 12%. The John Deere 9600 combined with Green Star yield monitoring, introduced in 1996, could map production variability across every acre. This wasn't speculation. This was data. If you were in your 30s in 1997, working on a farm that still operated with 70s and 80s technology, the path forward seemed obvious. Adopt or fall behind. Your neighbors were buying this equipment. The early adopters were documenting results. The dealers had financing packages that made it look easy. If you were in your 60s in 1997, you remembered something else. You remembered 1985, when land values collapsed 47% in 3 years. You remembered interest rates at 21%. You remembered county implement dealers going bankrupt. You remembered your neighbors, good farmers, careful farmers, farmers who'd worked their land for generations, losing everything because they'd taken on debt assuming prices would stay high and land values would keep rising. The 80s hadn't just taught Leonard Berquist caution. It had taught him that debt in agriculture isn't like debt anywhere else. When a factory worker finances a car and loses his job, he loses the car. When a farmer finances equipment and loses his crop, he can lose the farm because the farm is the collateral. Always. Todd understood this intellectually. Every farm kid who grew up in the 80s understood it. But understanding something intellectually and feeling it in your bones are different things. Leonard knew that no amount of explaining would bridge that gap. His son needed to see. If this conflict sounds familiar, if you had some version of this conversation in your own family in the 90s, I want to hear about it in the comments. Were you the one pushing for technology or the one pumping the brakes? What happened? How did it resolve? Tell your story below, because these conversations shaped a generation of farm families. Saturday morning arrived cold and clear. April in South Dakota. Too early for field work, but late enough that you could feel planting season coming. Todd met his father in the machine shed at 6. They took Leonard's pickup, a 1989 Ford F-250 with 180,000 miles. The truck was paid for, like everything else Leonard owned. They drove east on Highway 14, then south toward Mitchell. Leonard didn't explain where they were going or why. He turned on WNAX, the radio station out of Yankton, and listened to the market report. Corn $2.67, soybeans $6.85, cattle steady. Standard farm morning. They could have been headed anywhere. 40 minutes later, Leonard turned off the highway onto a gravel road. Another mile, and they came to a farm. Todd had driven past thousands of farms in his life. This one looked like any of them. Modest house, red barn, grain bins, machine shed. Except this one had a crowd. 50 vehicles already parked, more arriving. A big auction trailer set up in the yard. People he recognized from the co-op, from church, from other auctions. And equipment, lined up in rows like a dealer lot. Except it wasn't for sale, it was being sold. Leonard parked at the end of a row and shut off the engine. Whose farm is this? Todd asked. Leonard corrected. Was farm. Bank owns it now. Belonged to Marcus Olofsson. 42 years old. Wife, 3 kids. Lost it 2 months ago. Todd knew the name, but not the man. That was common enough in AG country. You knew of families without necessarily knowing them personally. They got out. The morning air smelled like diesel and coffee from the lunch wagon some church group had set up. The auctioneer's crew was already checking equipment, organizing lots, preparing for sale. Todd walked down the first row with his father. A John Deere 4640 tractor, 1979 model, showing hard use but maintained. A Case IH 1640 combine, older but functional. A DMI field cultivator. A Kraus disc. An anhydrous ammonia tank. A grain cart. An auger. Tools. A welder. Shop equipment. Everything a working farm needed. Everything Marcus Olofsson had needed. Past tense. What happened to him? Todd asked. Leonard pointed to a man standing near the barn, talking with the auctioneer. Mid-40s, wearing a coat too light for the weather, arms crossed. That was Olofsson, watching strangers prepare to sell the equipment he'd spent 20 years accumulating. "Hail," Leonard said. Summer of 94. Took out 800 acres of wheat. Complete loss. He had crop insurance, but it didn't cover what he had in it. Then 95 was dry. Yields down across the board. He'd expanded in 93. Bought the neighbor's quarter section for $650 an acre. Financed it 90%. The payment was manageable when grain prices were up, but when they normalized and his yields were short. Leonard didn't finish. He didn't need to. Todd did the math. 800 acres completely lost. Another season of below-average yields. A land payment on 160 acres at probably $45,000 a year. Operating loans for inputs. Equipment debt. The margin in farming is thin enough when everything goes right. When things go wrong, the margin disappears. That could happen to anyone, Todd said. That's weather, not management. That's right, Leonard agreed. Could happen to anyone, which is why you don't position yourself so that one bad year or even 2 bad years takes you out. Now here's what you need to understand about farm auctions in the 90s. The procedures were standardized, documented, and publicly recorded. The Federal Reserve Bank tracked agricultural liquidation sales across the upper Midwest. Their reports from this period show consistent patterns. Equipment at forced auctions sold for 40 to 60% of retail value. Land sold for 70 to 85% of market value if the bank could find buyers. In cases where debt exceeded asset value, what bankers call being upside down, farmers walked away with nothing, sometimes less than nothing, if the deficiency was large enough to pursue. The auction started at 9. The auctioneer, a man Todd recognized from other sales, took his position on the trailer and tested his microphone. The crowd gathered, maybe 80 people now. Farmers, dealers, neighbors, auction regulars. Some came to buy, some came to support, some came because in rural communities, you witness these things. You bear witness. We'll start with the small equipment and work our way up to the tractors and combine, the auctioneer announced. His voice had that rapid-fire rhythm auction callers develop. Professional, efficient, unsentimental. As you know, this is a complete dispersal sale. Everything sells absolute with no minimum bid. Terms are cash or approved check. Inspection was available yesterday and this morning. All sales final. He started with shop tools. Socket sets, wrenches, a rolling toolbox. These went quick. $50 here, $75 there. Farmers always need tools. Then smaller field equipment. A 3-point blade, $200. A grain auger, $800. A pull-type sprayer, $1,500. Todd watched the bidding. Watched the auctioneer work the crowd, calling out bids, pointing to bidders, keeping the rhythm going. Watched Marcus Olofsson standing by the barn, watching his farm dissolve into cash that wouldn't be his. The auctioneer moved to larger items. The field cultivator, a DMI 25-foot model that would have cost $18,000 new in the early 90s, sold for $6,200. The disc, maybe 10 years old, brought $4,100. The anhydrous tank and applicator went for $3,800 as a package. Now we're getting to the primary field equipment. The auctioneer announced. John Deere 4640 tractor, 1979 model, showing 5,840 hours. This is a good working tractor, well maintained. Let's start the bidding at $15,000. The JD 4640 was a workhorse tractor from an era when John Deere built machines that lasted generations. 130 horsepower, mechanical simplicity, reliable. In good condition, a 4640 would bring $28,000 to $32,000 in a private sale. Maybe more if the hours were low. $15,000. Someone called. I've got 15, now 16. 16 anybody? 15,000 going once. 16. 16,000, now 17. The bidding climbed. 17, 18, 19, 20. It stalled at 22,000. The auctioneer worked the crowd, cajoling, encouraging. 22.5. 23. It stopped there. $23,000. Going once, going twice, sold to bidder number 47. Less than market value. More than enough to demonstrate that this equipment was being sold at crisis prices. The Case IH 1640 combine came next. This was a more significant machine. A combine from the late 80s. Probably cost $85,000 new. Well used but functional. In a normal sale, it might bring $35,000. Let's start at $20,000 for this combine. Silence. $20,000 anybody? This is a good machine. Ready to work. $20,000. 15, someone offered. I've got 15,000. Now 18 anybody? The bidding was reluctant. 16,000. 17, 18. It hung there. 18,000 for this combine. That's a bargain. Folks, do I hear 19? Silence. 18,000 going once, going twice, sold for $18,000. Todd did the math automatically. An $85,000 machine selling for $18,000. That's 21 cents on the dollar. If you owed $40,000 on it, you just took a $22,000 loss. And you still owed the bank that $22,000 because the collateral didn't cover the debt. The sale continued. Each piece of equipment, each tool, each remnant of Marcus Ollison's farm operation going to the highest bidder at prices that reflected desperation, not value. The grain cart brought $2,400. The planter, a 6-row John Deere 7000 series, sold for $4,100. A disc harrow went for $1,850. 2 hours into the auction, they'd sold everything except the land. The auctioneer announced a 30-minute break before the real estate portion. People headed to the lunch wagon for coffee and sandwiches. Todd and Leonard stayed by the pickup. He owed about $285,000 when the bank called it. Leonard said quietly, between the land debt, the equipment notes, and the operating loans. The equipment just sold for maybe $110,000, and that's before the auction company takes their percentage. The land, if he's lucky, might bring $400 an acre for his 1,200 acres. That's $480,000. Sounds like it works out, right? Todd waited. Except the land is already collateralized for $240,000. So that nets out to another $240,000 after they pay off that note, plus the equipment sale minus the auction costs. Let's say $100,000. That's $340,000. He owed $285,000 when they called it, but interest and fees have been running. He might walk away with $30,000, maybe $40,000. After 42 years old, starting over. This is something they don't always emphasize in farm management courses. When a farm fails, when the bank forecloses, the arithmetic looks clean on paper. Liquidate the assets, pay the debts, distribute any remaining equity to the farmer. But the reality is messier. Auction costs, accumulated interest, legal fees, the gap between what equipment is worth and what it brings at a for sale. All of that comes out of what would have been the farmer's equity. According to USDA farm finance studies from the mid-1990s, the average farm foreclosure in the upper Midwest left a farm family with less than 15% of what they'd had in equity before the crisis began. Some left with nothing. Some, as Leonard suggested, left owing money they'd have to repay from wherever they ended up next. The real estate auction started at noon. The auctioneer presented the terms. 1,200 acres total, offered as a complete unit or in 4 separate quarters. Seller, meaning the bank, reserved the right to refuse all bids if they didn't meet the outstanding debt. Buyer would need 20% down with the balance due in 30 days. The bidding started at $350 per acre for the complete package. That was $420,000, below what the land was worth, but a starting point. It climbed, $360, $370, $380. The increments got smaller, $385, $390, $395. It stopped at $402 per acre. Total price, $482,400. $402 per acre. Going once. A new bidder raised his hand. $410. The original bidder countered. $415. It went to $425 per acre and stalled. The auctioneer worked the crowd hard. This was the big sale, the one that would determine whether the bank took a loss. For $25 per acre was $510,000. After paying off the existing land debt of $240,000 and the equipment debts, it would cover Marcus Ollison's obligations. But it stalled. Nobody would go higher. $425 per acre for 1,200 acres of productive farmland. Going once, going twice. Silence. Sold. Bidder number 12 for $425 per acre. Todd watched Marcus Ollison walk to his truck and drive away before the paperwork was complete. He didn't watch the crowd disperse, didn't watch the buyer shake hands with the bank representative. He just left. The drive back to Brookings County was quiet. Leonard let Todd process what he'd seen. It wasn't until they were 10 miles from home that Todd spoke. That wasn't bad management. No, Leonard agreed. That was bad luck. But in farming, bad luck and bad management, both in the same way if you're leveraged too high. So we never take risk, never modernize, never invest in the farm. I didn't say that. Leonard was quiet for a moment. Your plan, the one you brought me, it was $147,000 in equipment financed over 7 years. What happens if we have a year like Olafson's 94? Hail takes out half our crop. Or 95, drought cuts our yields. Can we make those payments? Todd had run scenarios, but he'd run optimistic scenarios. Average yields, stable prices, consistent production. He hadn't run the disaster scenarios because disasters aren't supposed to happen. Probably not, he admitted. And if we can't make the payments, the bank calls a note. The equipment is collateral. But we'd also have to put up land to secure that bigger loan. When the bank calls it, they take the equipment and the land. Maybe we get something back at auction. Maybe we don't. But we definitely lose control. They pulled into the farmyard. Leonard shut off the truck, but didn't get out. I'm not against the technology, he said. I've read the same research you have. I know precision agriculture works. But I also know that farming with debt means farming on the bank's terms, not yours. And when times get hard, banks don't care about your yield data or your long-term plans. They care about whether the payment cleared. This is a tension that defined agriculture in the 1990s. The technology was real, proven, and spreading. The benefits were documented, but the cost of entry was significant, and the financing required made farms vulnerable in ways they hadn't been when they operated with paid-off equipment. University farm management associations tracked this extensively. Their research from the late 90s showed a clear pattern. Farms that adopted precision agriculture between 1994 and 1998 showed higher per-acre returns than farms that didn't. The average benefit was $14 to $22 per acre, depending on crop and region. Over a large acreage, that's substantial. But the same research showed something else. Farms that financed precision AG adoption with secured loans and then experienced significant yield or price setbacks had a 37% higher chance of financial distress than farms that either waited to accumulate capital or finance equipment through operating loans rather than secured debt. The difference wasn't the technology. The technology worked. The difference was the financing structure and the vulnerability it created. Over the next week, Todd and Leonard had multiple conversations. Not arguments, conversations. Todd revised his proposal. Instead of $147,000 in new equipment all at once, he proposed a phased approach. Start with a yield monitor system for their existing case IH-1680 combine. That was $8,500. Finance it through an operating loan, not secured debt. Use it for 2 seasons. Document the results. Build the case for additional technology based on actual data from their farm. Leonard thought about it. $8,500 was manageable. It didn't require mortgaging land. If it didn't work, if the technology didn't deliver what the manufacturers promised, they could walk away without catastrophic loss. And if it did work, they'd have documented proof to justify the next step. All right, Leonard said. We'll try the yield monitor. But you're running it. I want reports every week during harvest showing what it's telling us that we didn't already know. And at the end of the season, you show me how it paid for itself. That fall, they harvested with the AG Leader PF 3000 yield monitor installed. The system used GPS positioning to map yield variability across every field. It documented areas where production was significantly higher or lower than the field average. It identified patterns that decades of experience hadn't revealed. The east quarter of the home section, an 80-acre field that Leonard had always considered uniform, showed yield variation of 47 bushels per acre from the highest producing areas to the lowest. The low areas weren't wet spots or obvious problem zones. They were just different. Something about the soil, the fertility, the microclimate. Something that showed up in production, but not in observation. Todd compiled the data. He created maps. He calculated what it cost them to treat that entire field uniformly, when parts of it would respond better to different inputs. This one field, he told his father in December. If we variable rate the fertilizer based on what the yield monitor showed us, we can cut phosphorus and potassium applications in the high-producing zones and increase nitrogen in the low-producing zones. That's $4,100 in reduced input costs, plus whatever yield improvement we get from better match fertility. One field, we have 20 fields. Leonard studied the maps. He'd farmed 80 acres for 43 years. He knew every foot of it, or thought he did. The yield monitor showed him something he'd never seen. "What's the next piece of equipment?" he asked. "Variable rate fertilizer spreader. We can rent one for next season to test it, or buy used for about $12,000. "Rent," Leonard said. "Let's prove it works before we buy it." They rented. They tested. It worked. Not perfectly. The technology was still developing. The calibration was finicky. The software crashed twice during spring application. But it worked well enough to document benefits. The following year, they bought a used variable rate controller and modified their existing spreader. 2 years after the Mitchell auction, they had yield monitors, variable rate capability, and GPS guidance on their newest tractor, a used John Deere 8200 they bought from a retiring farmer. Total investment, $31,000 over 30 months, all financed through operating loans, all paid off within 18 months. No secured debt, no mortgage land, no vulnerability if a season went wrong. Their per acre returns increased from $87 average in 1996 to $118 average in 1999. Part of that was better commodity prices. Part was better weather. But $14 per acre, maybe $16, came from precision agriculture. Over 1,600 acres. That's $22,400 to $25,600 per year. The technology had paid for itself. But here's what matters more than the numbers. The approach, incremental, proven, financed conservatively, kept the farm safe. When 1998 hit and commodity prices collapsed to levels not seen since the 80s, when corn dropped to $1.94 per bushel and soybeans fell below $5, farms across the Midwest went into crisis mode. Some failed. The ones that survived were the ones that could absorb the shock, the ones without crushing debt loads, the ones that had maintained flexibility. The Bergquist farm survived. Barely made money in 1998, but survived. Because when prices dropped, they could cut costs, delay purchases, and wait it out. They weren't making loan payments on $147,000 worth of equipment. I want to pause here and talk about what this story represents, because it's easy to take the wrong lesson from it. This isn't a story about rejecting technology. Todd was right about precision agriculture. It worked. It made their farm more profitable, more efficient, better managed. Leonard was right about debt. It's dangerous, especially in agriculture where revenue fluctuates with factors beyond anyone's control. The resolution, phase adoption, conservative financing, documented results before scaling up, represents a synthesis that many successful farm families found in the 90s. It wasn't tradition versus progress. It was sustainable progress. It was adopting technology in a way that didn't bet the farm. According to agricultural lenders' reports from the late 90s, farms that survived both the technology transition and the 1998 price crash shared common characteristics. Debt-to-asset ratios below 45%, diversified income sources, phased technology adoption, and strong working capital reserves. The farms that failed, and there were still failures, even after the 80s crisis had passed, typically had aggressive expansion plans financed with secured debt, concentrated revenue sources, and insufficient capital reserves to weather unexpected downturns. This pattern persists today. The specific technologies have changed. Now it's autonomous tractors, drone surveillance, AI-powered crop management systems. The costs have increased proportionally. But the fundamental question remains the same. How do you modernize a farm operation without creating vulnerability that could destroy it? What Todd learned at that auction wasn't that technology was bad or that his father was right about everything. What he learned was that in agriculture, the margin of error is smaller than people think. The distance between success and failure, between a working farm and a foreclosure sale, can be one bad year if you're positioned wrong. And no amount of technology, no matter how advanced, eliminates the fundamental unpredictability of farming. Leonard learned something too. He learned that dismissing new approaches because their new is its own kind of risk. Agriculture was changing. The farms that succeeded would be the ones that adapted intelligently. But intelligence meant understanding both the opportunity and the risk. It meant moving forward without forgetting the lessons of moving too fast. By 2000, when Todd took over primary management of the farm operation, Leonard still worked, but had stepped back from daily decisions. They were running a modern precision agriculture operation. GPS guidance on both tractors. Yield, monitoring on the combine. Variable rate application for all major inputs. Grid soil sampling on a 3-year rotation. Farm management software tracking costs and returns for every field. And they owned it all. Mortgage 0 acres to acquire it. Finance some equipment through operating loans, but never secured debt against land. Built the precision agriculture capability over 5 years instead of buying all at once. Their neighbor 3 miles east did it differently. Bought the complete Precision AG package in 1997. Financed through equipment loans secured by farmland. Ran it well. Good manager, careful farmer. Had 2 good years, then 1998 hit. Prices crashed. He couldn't make the payments. Bank worked with him through 1999, but when 2000 wasn't enough better, they called it. That family is farming, yet they survived, but they had to sell half their land to pay down debt and keep the operation viable. That's the reality of farm finance that you can only really understand if you've lived it. The decisions that look conservative can seem short-sighted. The decisions that look progressive can be catastrophic. The difference between wisdom and stubbornness, between caution and cowardice, is often only visible in hindsight. If you're watching this and you lived through these exact decisions in the 90s, the technology adoption questions, the financing debates, the generational tensions over how to move forward, I want to know how it turned out for your family. Did you mortgage the farm for new equipment? Did you wait? Did you find a middle path like the Bergquists? How did the 1998 crash affect your operation? Comment below and share your story, because these decisions shaped an entire generation of farm families, and the lessons still apply. The Bergquist farm is still operating. Todd runs it now. Leonard passed in 2008. The precision agriculture capability they built in the late 90s has evolved into technology Leonard couldn't have imagined. Satellite imagery, real-time weather integration, predictive analytics. The farm is more efficient, more profitable, more data-driven than it was. But it's also still debt-free on the land. That 400 acres Leonard refused a mortgage in 1997, still owned free and clear. When commodity prices crashed again in 2014-2015, when farm income dropped across the Midwest and operations started failing again, the Bergquist farm weathered it. Not because they were better farmers than their neighbors. Not because they were luckier, but because they'd structured the operation to survive bad years, not just profit from good ones. That's Leonard's legacy. Not refusing technology, he didn't. Not being backward or stubborn, he wasn't. His legacy is understanding that in agriculture, survival comes first. Everything else is secondary. You can have the best technology, the best management, the best land in the county. But if you position yourself so that one bad year takes you out, none of it matters. Todd keeps the printout from the Mitchell auction in his desk. The sale bill listing every piece of equipment Marcus Olofsson sold for pennies on the dollar. He keeps it because it reminds him of what can happen when circumstances and debt collide. And he keeps it because it reminds him of what his father was trying to teach him that Saturday morning. It's not a story about rejecting progress. It's a story about sustainable progress, about moving forward in a way that doesn't create the conditions for moving backward catastrophically. The technology revolution in agriculture was real. The farms that adopted it succeeded, on average, better than the farms that didn't. But the farms that adopted it carelessly, financing it aggressively, betting everything on yields and prices continuing favorably, some of those farms aren't farming anymore. This same dynamic is playing out right now. Autonomous equipment, precision agriculture platforms that cost 6 figures, data management systems that promise revolutionary efficiency, all real, all effective, all expensive, and all capable of destroying a farm if the financing structure creates vulnerability that a bad year or two can exploit. The lesson from 1997, from that auction, from Leonard taking his son to witness what failure looks like, is that how you adopt technology matters as much as whether you adopt it. The path forward exists, but it's narrower than the sales presentation suggests, and the cost of stepping off that path is higher than spreadsheets capture. If this story resonated with you, if it connected to your own experience navigating the balance between tradition and progress in agriculture. Subscribe for more stories from this era. These narratives bridge generations, the ones who built these farms and the ones who transformed them. And if that matters to you, you know what to do. The 1990s didn't settle the debate between caution and ambition in farming. That conversation continues. But the decade taught lessons worth remembering, worth passing on, worth telling to anyone who thinks farming is just about putting seeds in the ground and hoping for rain. It's about that. But it's also about understanding that the ground you're putting those seeds in might not be yours anymore if you make the wrong bet about the future. And no technology, no matter how revolutionary, changes that fundamental arithmetic of agricultural risk.